Business not as usual. I'm Cameron Porter, and this is Venture Utah. We've got a couple great guests for you today. We're going to talk about your credit. We're also going to talk about some mindset coaching. But first, we have some special news stories of interest to all of you. And those are that 12 chambers of commerce in Utah have formed the Utah Chamber Policy Coalition with the intent of uniting the voices of businesses throughout the state on policy in relation to taxation, regulation, education, housing, the environment, and transportation. The leaders of the various chambers are not expecting to agree on everything, and each chamber retains their own independent voice on issues unique to each local chapter. Aaron Kornberg, board chair of the Utah Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, said, "We expect that there will be much to unite us and that on those issues our voice will resonate with government, business, and community leaders." Critics point out that business owners are an intensely diverse group with widely varying political persuasions, and that a micro business with fewer than 10 employees has very different priorities than a business with several hundred employees. As such, a statewide coalition of local chambers of commerce may result in official policy recommendations that directly harm many businesses. The founding members of the coalition are as follows: the Salt Lake Chamber, St. George Area Chamber of Commerce, Cedar City Chamber, Utah Black Chamber, Utah Hispanic Chamber, Davis Chamber, Cache Valley Chamber, Kanab Area Chamber, Point of the Mountain Chamber, Vernal Area Chamber, American Fork Chamber, and Chamber West. AAA has released their estimate of summer travel this year. For the first year since 2009, the estimate of trips from July to September has decreased from the previous year. This is no surprise, and AAA estimates the drop to be around 15% from last year. For measurement, AAA used person trips. In other words, if a family of 5 goes on a trip, that would count as 5 trips. All told, if 2020 had been a normal year, AAA would be projecting 857 million trips. But as it stands, they are estimating that this year we'll only see around 700 million trips. What's even more interesting is how travel behavior has changed. A much larger percentage of people are booking their trips with very little advance notice, indicating a reluctance to plan for a big trip that may never happen. There's also much more long weekend trips than extended vacations, and far more people will drive for their vacation instead of fly, take a train, or take a cruise ship. While travel-related bookings have continued to increase gradually since April, air travel has been the slowest to rebound, while road trips are only 3% behind last year. According to a new study from essential oil company Young Living, there are big differences between men and women when it comes to parents dealing with the new stress of 2020. Beginning with 25% of men saying they've experienced less stress compared to 38% of women saying they've experienced a lot more. Coping mechanisms also vary drastically among the sexes, with 52% of women preferring to spend time outdoors compared to 32% of men, and 33% of men turning to drinking compared to 22% of women. The study has uncovered a clash between moms and dads when it comes to parenting styles, from bedtime routines to homeschooling, as everyone looks to bring some normalcy back to the home. Men are significantly more likely to resort to certain tactics over women, such as giving a treat or a bribe, 28% versus 19%, spanking, 14% versus 3%, locking them in their rooms, 10% versus 3%, and going outside to not hear them crying, 10% versus 4%. The study also found that 19% of men report regularly giving their child a sleep aid compared to 12% of women. The news isn't all bad, however. In fact, 60% of parents say that they've grown closer with their children by spending more time together. Even better, 94% of parents have talked to their children about what's going on. All signs point to better communication and stronger families. Alrighty, our first guest this week is Ty Olsen with Liag Consulting. He's going to talk to us about credit scores, a little bit about business owners and their credit, and also just credit tips in general. So Ty, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so first question, just going to jump right into it. What is the number one thing that you see with business owners that affects their credit?
I would say utilization rates on business credit cards, because when you're a business owner, you can have business credit cards through your LLC or your S Corp or whatever that looks like. A lot of times there's a lot of money going on those credit cards to run a business, such as a contractor, for instance. sometimes people don't understand that if they have a certain amount on their credit card up to their max balance, it's going to negatively affect their score. So typically it's about 30% is where you want to keep your balance if you're not paying it off every month. And 10%, anything below 10% is actually going to help your credit score in the long run, and anything over 30 is going to negatively affect your credit score.
Interesting. And so many business owners, I mean, we have business credit cards here, and sometimes I got to dump a lot on a single credit card for a while because that's just the way that I needed to buy something big, and then you pay it off and kind of move forward. So that's a good thing to know. So business debt can affect personal credit.
Absolutely. Yeah, it will affect your personal credit score depending on how it's been put into an application. So there are instances where it doesn't, but more often than not it does. And I think people a lot of times don't realize that. They think it's just going to, kind of, I'm safe because I'm in an LLC, but it doesn't always quite work that way.
That's very interesting because, the LLC is just for liability. It has nothing to do with your credit score or how good of a bet you are to a potential lender.
Absolutely.
And I would imagine that would change a little bit, based on if it's a publicly traded company and they take on that debt, it's probably not going to affect your personal credit nearly as much as if you're a solopreneur.
Right.
And it's all under your name and things like that. So, okay, so moving on to just credit in general. The credit scores there's so much that goes into calculating a credit score. I think people tend to underestimate how complicated the algorithm is.
Right.
So what are some things that you've found that most people aren't aware of that's affecting their credit score?
One thing is just not using credit. So a lot of people will not understand that a good credit mix also will help their credit score. So you want to have a diversified portfolio, if you will, when it comes to credit, maybe like a car loan, a credit card, a mortgage, whatever that looks like. But just not using credit doesn't give you any credit history at all. So a lot of times that's what happens with kids coming out of high school. They just don't have any credit yet, so they don't have a credit score, which doesn't allow them to go out and get a car loan if they need to for their first job or whatnot. And one thing that you can do, a lot of people don't know, for the parents out there, is when your kid turns 13, you can actually add them as an authorized user onto one of your cards.
Oh, that's cool.
And you don't even have to give them the credit card. So you don't have to run the risk of them charging up your credit card at the mall or anything. And that will actually help their score because they'll have a history. So by the time they graduate high school, they can have a score in the high sixes, low sevens.
Nice. Okay, so it's one of those things where you can't win the game if you don't play.
Exactly.
You got to play the game. They've got to have, and is it so much that they're saying if you don't have credit history, are they saying that you're a bad bet?
Not necessarily. Usually if we pull credit, because I have a second job where I pull people's credit pretty frequently, and it's not necessarily that they're a bad bet, it's just that we don't have anything to go off of. So we don't know whether they're a bad bet or a good bet, it's just a neutral bet. But in the end, that's a risk for whoever's pulling the credit.
Gotcha, that makes sense. So number one is, let's see, so then that would be if you don't, so the first one would be if you don't have a history, that can negatively impact the score because there's nothing there to guarantee anything or give evidence for your trustworthiness.
That's
I guess
correct.
you could say. Okay, so what are some other common things that you've seen?
Like I said, mix your portfolio. Get a diverse credit, and then the biggest thing is always make sure to pay your payments on time. That's going to be the biggest part of what makes your credit score what it is. Mortgages are the worst payments that you want to miss. So different payments do make a little bit of a difference on how it's going to affect your score. So with the coronavirus pandemic, I know a lot of people were in trouble paying their mortgages, and we were letting our clients know if you really have to skip a payment, maybe skip some credit cards or a car loan or something of that sort. Because if you do want to move forward to get another mortgage in the future, a mortgage late is the worst thing that you could have. So in the instance that you are in a position where you do need to skip a payment, you should try to do something other than a mortgage or a rent payment.
Just because it'll affect your credit less if you pay that and don't pay the credit cards.
Yeah, and lending especially. So when you go to get loans, especially for housing, if they see lates on rent or mortgage, it's almost a done deal right there. They're not going to lend to you.
That's a tough situation, if you've got a credit card that's charging you 20% per year, and you've got to choose between that or the mortgage, which is on that that fixed rate. It's a fixed payment. Like, if I skip 30 days, I just make it up later. I can see why that would be a real point of concern for somebody. So it's good to know that paying the mortgage first is going to help your credit the most.
Yep.
Okay. What about, so if you've got a diverse portfolio, you've got all your credit cards, do you want to pay off all those credit cards completely at the end of each month?
Not necessarily. So if you do leave a small balance on there that's below that 10%, it does look like you're using the credit to the creditor, which can in turn help your score. I personally do pay mine off every month, and I don't see that it affects my credit score that much to where I'm necessarily concerned about making sure I'm so perfect to keep a few dollars in there. But I know a lot of people do, and I know it does help. So I don't want to say that you shouldn't pay them off because you're going to be fine if you do. But if you do leave a small balance on there, it definitely will help.
Interesting, but it's going to be more of a smaller bump.
Exactly.
So if you leave $10 or something on each month, it just shows that you're using it.
Right, and it just depends on how deeply involved you want to be in your credit cards. Right. How often you want to be going, making sure that you have the exact amount in there. For me, I just prefer to just pay it off.
Sure.
But yes, it does help if you leave a small balance on there.
That's really interesting. Anything else that you've seen that surprises people when you tell them it can help?
One thing I'd like to talk about is just all of the different credit, I guess, things like Credit Karma, Credit Sesame versus an actual like FICO score. One thing that I run into a lot is people will look at Credit Karma and think their score is one thing, and then credit will be pulled and it'll be lower or higher, and they'll come to me and say, why is my credit score 20, 30 points off? Different creditors are using different algorithms to get an understanding of what your credit score looks like. So something like Credit Karma is going to use what's called an advantage score, which is a completely different algorithm, where most banks and lenders right now are using what's called a FICO 9 score, which is going to be more accurate. So I think when people are actively tracking their credit and being conscious about where it's at, it's important to make sure that you're looking at a FICO 9 score rather than Credit Karma. Credit Karma is a great tool for understanding trends. So if you see an upward trend in Credit Karma, you can pretty safely assume that it's your score is going up, or vice versa. And that's what Credit Karma can be really good for. But if you're wanting to really understand where your score is, I always recommend maybe like if you bank with America First, I know they have a FICO score in there. That one tends to be a lot more accurate.
Okay, that's really interesting. Good to know. So Credit Karma is definitely still a valuable tool, but maybe just expect that your actual score might be 20 to 30 points off in either direction.
Yep.
Do you see much wider variance than that? Is there a case where there are 100 points?
I have, yeah. I've actually pulled credit and had it come back about 80 points lower than what Credit Karma was reporting.
That's a nasty surprise.
Yeah, and that was kind of a bad deal because normally it's not. I'd say majority of the time it's about 20 to 30 points if it is, and sometimes they're spot on. So it's kind of hard to tell where it's going to be exactly. So whenever I'm trying to get an idea and kind of coaching somebody, I always recommend have Credit Karma, pay attention to it, track those trends, but I also want to know what your FICO is showing through whatever banks or credit unions that you have.
Gotcha. And there's ways to get your FICO score for free, right?
Yeah, actually there's a website called I think it's freeannualreport.com. You can Google it. I think through coronavirus they're letting you pull it once a week, where typically it's once a year.
Oh, wow.
But you can actually go in once a year and pull a free report from all three bureaus, all three of the main bureaus, and it will give you everything that's ever been on your report. And through there you can actually set up accounts with TransUnion, Experian, and Equifax, and actively dispute any negative items straight through there. So a lot of people think it's this big scary process to dispute, but they actually make it really easy. You just create the accounts with all three bureaus, and you can go in and click the negative items that are on your credit, and if it's a mistake, then you just follow the steps, and that's actually helped me a lot in the past, just off a couple things that shouldn't have been on my credit report that were negative.
Interesting.
And I was able to get those reversed just through doing that.
Oh, that's really cool. So you're able to go through and do that. Now, what about putting a freeze on your credit with the three agencies? Does that impact your credit one way or the other?
No, not necessarily. The only thing with freezing your credit is if you actually forget that it's frozen and you go to apply for credit, it's not going to pull a credit score at all. There's obviously a lot of safety behind freezing your credit, just as far as theft goes. But no, it's not necessarily going to negative impact you unless you're trying to pull credit. You'll have to go in and unfreeze that and then refreeze it. So it's just more of a hassle than anything.
That was my personal experience as well. It's quite hassling. I froze all three. There was the Equifax breach a couple years ago. I'm not sure how long ago that was, but after that I froze all my credit, thinking, I don't use it very often anyway. Might as well just keep myself safe. And then turned out the following year I had like 8 things I needed to apply for.
Right.
And then for the first 4, I couldn't even figure out why it was coming back. Like it was coming back as like non-existent, like the no record. I was like, what's going on? And I finally remembered, I froze it, and It was this big complicated thing. So really quick, I wanted to ask specifically about Liag Consulting.
Okay.
What is it exactly that you do for people?
So I started Liag not so much to help with credit in the sense of like obtaining lending, because I'm a mortgage lender on the side. So that's always free. That education, my clients can always just call me and we can talk about it over the phone, or they can come in. I started that as a way to share my passion for credit cards. I think credit cards have a really bad stigma around them for millennials especially. And they're just such a helpful tool if you can use them responsibly. So I started Liag because I wanted to share that passion with other people around me, because we have, as in my wife and I, we've been able to travel and get so many benefits from credit cards that just otherwise would not be attainable without the help of those. And especially with business owners, there's so many perks through business credit cards, as you would know, that you can unlock through the use of responsible credit card use, that it just doesn't make sense not to be taking advantage of those. But there's lots of rules around these credit cards, such as Chase. So there's kind of an unwritten rule of Chase. It's the 524 rule, where if you've taken out 5 credit cards in the last 24 months, it's pretty much an auto decline whenever you go to apply for a new credit card.
Oh, interesting.
So, and Amex has their own set of rules, Citi, all the credit card issuers do. So when you're getting into, I like to call it the credit card game, you kind of need to be aware of all those rules and really put a game plan together for that credit card pathway, and when you're going to apply for it, which one you're going to apply for, why you want to, and obviously there's annual fees involved too, so you've got to make sure that you're extracting enough value out of that card to make that annual fee worth it. So that's what I do for my clients. We kind of come in, sit down, I get an idea of what their goals are, and then we sit down and just kind of make a pathway for them.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So if people want to get in touch with you to utilize your consulting services, what's the best way to reach out?
Just my phone. It's 801-648-6550. You can always reach me at liagconsulting@gmail.com.
Perfect. All right. We'll throw that up on the screen as well. Thank you so much for being with us, Ty.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All righty. Our next guest today is Scott McKinley, longtime friend and partner of the show. Scott, thank you for being here.
Happy to be here.
So we had a pretty long conversation about what we're going to have our conversation about today.
I mean, it wasn't terribly long, but we discussed. Yeah, we did.
And we settled on we wanted to first talk a little bit about control.
Yeah.
So we're seeing a lot in society. We're seeing it within ourselves, where when things seem to be the most chaotic, the most out of control, it's our instinct to seize that control and try to take control back over something.
Right.
Is that, talk to me a little bit about that phenomenon.
Oh, well, I mean, it happens in all aspects of our life. I mean, we try to control our kids. We try to control people that we work with. We try to control other drivers. I don't know if that's something that you've ever struggled with, but that was an area that was always a frustration for me. And I think a good question to ask is, why do we try to control things? Like, what do you think is the reason that people are out there trying to get control? What's motivating that?
I think it's a fear of being endangered.
Yeah, it's fear. That's really what it is. It's fear. You know, I want to control my kids because I'm afraid that something bad is going to happen to them. And so I act on that emotion, that concern, because I want to keep them safe. But in some situations, that can actually do damage to a relationship. Kids get raised feeling like their parents never gave them an option to make choices on their own. And so what do? They push away. They go out and they do things that their parents specifically told them not to do, because that individual wants to feel like they're in control of themselves, and it's just a response to fear. I think that's really where that desire to control things comes from, is I want things to be safe, but that undercurrent is just strictly coming from fear.
So speaking specifically about parenting, I guess, you know, where's the balance point between trying to control your kids and then just letting them do whatever?
Well, I think that it's coming to a place, like, let's use my kids for an example. So I have four kids. My oldest is 22, my youngest is 5, then I've got a couple in between. And, you know, I've learned as a parent how to, you know, really improve that relationship. My first kid, it was fear. So of course I wanted to control him. I didn't want him to, you know, make the same mistakes that I made. And so I would control him. Well, that went a little too much, and it damaged the relationship that we had during the teenage years and into the adolescent years. Whereas with my younger child, she's just so strong-willed, and that desire to try to control her, to keep her in check, and to be doing the things that she's supposed to do. Bedtime, going to bed without any attitude, those frustrating moments that parents have. And my wife has just said, you can't control her. You have to get down and speak with her in a way where she's not, like, you're giving her options, you're giving her choices. I can kind of guide her with the choices that I give to her, but it's making sure that, we feel like we have that say in what's going on in our life. And while we were talking earlier at the beginning, I said that, what can we really control? What do you have control over here as a business owner?
What I do.
You have control over what you do. More importantly, you have control over the way that you choose to respond in situations. And that, as a parent, was kind of that groundbreaking thing in learning to parent Aria versus the way I parented Taylor, was just going, I can choose to respond differently. I don't have to let that fear overtake me. And that's really where the big challenge is for us to be able to identify what's my emotion that's driving me in this moment to try to control things. We kind of touched a little bit on masks, because that's just, at the top of the list of what people are talking about right now. And I know that there are strong arguments for wearing masks. I know people have arguments for not wearing masks, strong arguments for not wearing masks. And it's really coming from perspective. And I think that for us as a society, the important thing is being willing to practice empathy and notice people's perspective, and then realize we can't control other people. We can just choose to control how we want to respond. So, I'm one of those people that I think masks are a good idea. I don't, I think when we're out, especially in big areas, I think it's a smart thing to do. And I'll be walking through a store and I'll see somebody, and there's 99% of the people wearing a mask, and there's a family walking around that aren't wearing the mask. And so my internal desire to go control them kicks in. But by being aware that that's a thing, by being aware that my emotion is fear, or it's wanting me to react and wanting me to say something, I can't control that family. What's going to happen if I walk up to that family with my phone and start recording them? Most cases, it's going to turn into something pretty ugly. You see it on Facebook. You see it on on the social media. So,
can I jump in for a second?
Yeah.
I think what's really important here is a distinction. Right now, you are not conceding that family made a good or a bad choice.
Right.
You still disapprove of their choice.
Right.
And you still would, I would assume, try to take some action that would result in them wearing a mask if you could.
Is it going to?
But it's not going to.
Absolutely not.
That's why you're choosing not to. It has nothing to do with your personal feelings about whether they should be wearing a mask.
Right.
It has everything to do with looking ahead to what the consequences of your actions are going to be and deciding that those are not the consequences you want.
And do you know how long it's taken me to get to that place? It's taken me a long time to evolve, because my old self would I wanted to control things. I wanted to share my opinion with people, and from my perspective, this is the right thing to do, but that's just my perspective. That's just me. So I think that as we talk about wanting to control things, the first thing that we've got to get in check is that ego, and realize that I can't control the drivers. I can parent differently. I can learn to parent, so I'm giving options. I want my kids to be able to make choices so they can live their life and not rebel. And that's not what's going on in my relationship with my oldest son. I kind of alluded to that before. I don't want to make it sound like he's rebelling in any way. But what do I really want? I just want to be safe. We just want to be safe. Well, who has control over that? We do. If you don't want to go out and be around people that aren't wearing masks, that's a choice. Then don't go out. Order on Amazon. Find ways around it. If you want to go out and not wear a mask, it's you've got to realize it's your choice. You are the one that controls from the inside. It's an illusion to think that we can control what's going on around us.
I think that's a principle that's easier to understand if you separate it from a highly polarized issue.
True.
You know, I mean, if I'm with my kids in a public area, my kids are 4 and 3, well, one's about to turn 5, so 5, 3, and 1. If I'm walking down some public area and there's a couple of teenagers who are making out on the corner and being very flagrant about it,
Yeah.
I'm not going to appreciate that.
Yeah.
I'm going to be frustrated because I have my little kids with me. I mean, first of all, it's not like I want to watch that either.
Yeah.
But then my kids are going to start asking me questions. What are they doing? What's going on? And I have to figure out some kind of answer. But that's kind of just the price you pay to be in society. I mean, I hate to use that cliched phrase,
Yeah.
but there's a certain amount of concessions you have to make that people are different from you.
Yeah.
People are going to make choices besides that which you want them to make.
Right.
And there's a point where you just kind of got to let people live and figure out how you can control you to get the results you want.
You know, if we could just really focus on compassion right now. Just compassion is, understanding where a person is. They're experiencing life. They're just doing the things that make them happy. That's what people are trying to do, is people are trying to be happy. We get that desire to control people because they're not doing what we think is going to lead to happiness. We get frustrated, choose to walk away. Just choose to go, what good is it going to do me to go up and try and control these teenagers? I mean, good luck with that.
One final question.
Okay.
Do you see a connection between our desire for control and our tendency to oversimplify things, to take things that are highly nuanced and boil it down to just do this or just do that?
Give me an example. Like, give me a point of reference.
Well, we can talk about masks. You mentioned that masks it's a complicated issue. There are arguments for, there are arguments against, there's research for, there's research against. And people tend to take whichever one they want to be true and just say, just wear masks. Or they say, masks are useless. And they just remove all nuance and oversimplify it.
Yeah.
Do you see that as connected to control?
Yeah, I do. I think it's just wanting it to be done. It's that desire to just, boy, I want this over with. I want to just have this be done. So just do it. Forget any perspective. That's it. It's not really considering other people's perspective.
Fair enough. Awesome. Unfortunately, that is the last question that we have time for. Quick reminder for the audience, best way to contact you?
You can email me at scott@2evolvecoaching.com.
Perfect. 2evolvecoaching.com. All right. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you next week on Venture Utah.